Hi, I'm Ranger David Smith, and this is a Ranger Minute here at Grand Canyon National Park. You know, when I'm hiking along the rim, one of the most common questions I get from park visitors is, how old is this place? And I'm always forced to ask, what do you mean? Do you mean the rocks here? Do you mean the canyon? Do you mean the river? Well, in the next minute, I'm going to try to tell you that story and do it concisely. In order to do that, we'll have to go to the very bottom of the canyon and talk about that layer that's all the way down there, the Vishnu Schist. Vishnu Schist, 1.7 billion years old.
Where did the idea of millions and billions of years come from? Is it based on some sort of fact like radiometric dating? Well, actually, no. The answer may surprise you. We're going to take about 10 minutes and look at the history of this idea and see where it came from, and does the Bible talk about it? We'll start by taking a look at my college geology book, which is a Prentice Hall book from 1971. On page 2 of the book is this most important definition. Please pause the video at this point and read the text carefully. Restart it when you've read it. Here we're introduced to the word uniformitarianism. Take note that all of geological interpretation is based on this. We're going to take a look at more statements about uniformitarianism in a moment, and then we're also going to look at Hutton's original wording. On page 3 of the text it says, "We shall find that many of the conclusions of physical geology are based on the conviction that modern processes also operated in the past." What do they mean by the word conviction? Here's a definition from a Princeton website, Princeton University, and it says conviction means an unshakable belief in something without need for proof or evidence. Below this on page 3, it continues and says, past processes presumably operated at the same slow pace. Well, wait a minute. It says the word presumably. Why do they throw presumably in? This is the meat of the lesson. Uniformitarianism was and always has been a presumption. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to deny it. It's just a presumption. Let's continue with the text. Past processes presumably operated at the same slow pace as those of today. Consequently, very long periods of time must have been available for the processes to accomplish their tasks. This point is absolutely key. Uniformitarianism is and always has been a presumption. Now the text said that uniformitarianism was stated as the present is the key to the past. Let's take a look at Hutton's original wording. This text comes from the end of one of Hutton's books and concludes his thought. He says, not only are no powers to be employed that are not natural to the globe. Is he basing this on something? No, he's just saying this is what we're going to do. We're not going to consider anything that's not natural to the globe. You know what that means? That means he's not going to consider anything supernatural. Hutton continues, no action to be admitted of except those of which we know the principle. I guess that rules out the supernatural. No extraordinary events to be alleged in order to explain a common appearance. Well, that might be the Great Flood. He says the powers of nature are not to be employed in order to destroy the very object of those powers. We are not to make nature act in violation to that order which we actually observe, and in subversion of that end to which is to be perceived in the system of created things. He continues, in whatever manner, therefore, we are to employ the great agents, fire and water, for producing those things which appear, it ought to be in such a way as is consistent with the propagation of plants and life of animals upon the surface of the earth. Well, that seems to fly in the face of Noah's flood. He continues, chaos and confusion are not to be introduced into the order of nature because certain things appear to our partial views as being in some disorder, nor are we to proceed in feigning causes when those seem insufficient which occur in our experience. Well, that absolutely rules out the catastrophic flood because it was supposed to be a one-time event. Hutton is denying two specific things with his statement. Let's organize the highlighted sections of his text and see what these two things were. The first part was, not only are no powers to be employed that are not natural to the globe. So Hutton is denying the supernatural. He doesn't prove supernatural doesn't exist, he simply denies it. And the second part, as you saw, where he says, we are not to make nature act in violation to that order which we actually observe. Then he talks about fire and water and how to use it to propagate life. That's a denial of the flood. Because remember, the flood was specifically sent to destroy life. So Hutton's denying two things, the supernatural and the flood. This was a direct denial of the biblical view, which was the mainstream view in Hutton's day. Remember, his denial was willful. It wasn't based on fact, but on presumption. These days, evolutionists try to say they've moved beyond uniformitarianism, but that's really just a smokescreen. All variations of the concept still deny these two things. And those two things are the supernatural and the flood. The next slide is going to give a sample argument from one of the modern uniformitarians. You can pause the video to read the entire text here. I'm just going to comment on a few of the parts. The top highlighted section notes that the prevailing view in the 18th and early 19th centuries was that the earth had been created by supernatural means and had been shaped by several catastrophes such as worldwide floods. That's important because it verifies that these were the two things that they were changing. They were going to deny these two things. In the middle of the page, they say they no longer subscribe to Lyell uniformitarianism. And further on they say they call the new version actualism, which allows for natural catastrophes, even asteroids, but they don't allow for the supernatural and they don't allow for the biblical flood. Remember their text had said that the worldview was supernatural creation and a worldwide flood, and that the new views don't allow for that. Again, if you read their text closely, you'll see they allow for almost anything except supernatural creation and the flood. They'll allow for other floods, asteroids, volcanic eruptions, and landslides, just not the supernatural and not the flood. Some of their explanations, like an asteroid killing off all the dinosaurs, are as spectacular as the flood, but they won't allow for the flood. You know, it's interesting to see what the Bible has to say about this. The Apostle Peter wrote a letter about 2,000 years ago, and in it he said, "Know this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, Where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation." That's uniformism. For this they are willingly ignorant. That by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. That's the supernatural. Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Well, gee, that's the worldwide flood. These are the same things denied specifically by Hutton and all the modern views. Once again, look at Hutton's wording. He denied these two things, the supernatural and the flood, and then compare it to the Bible prophecy. No supernatural, no flood. It's important to note that all the variations, such as actualism, still deny these two things. Remember, their basis is presumption, not fact. And remember that conviction means an unshakable belief in something without the need for proof or evidence. So you're saying that the evidence supporting long ages is circumstantial? Yes, absolutely.